Hello and welcome to this special. According to industry body NASSCOM, just 25% of engineers and science graduates that pass out of colleges in India are employable. The hospitality industry claims that the supply of trained professionals in the sector is less than 10% of the demand right now. In fact, look at any sector and you will find shocking evidence of the massive gap in India's skilled workforce. What needs to be done to bridge the gap, and where do we start? To discuss these questions, joining me today are Mr. Godrej, who is the advisor to the Prime Minister on Skills, Mr. Godrej, Chairman of India at 75 Foundation, Mr. Rajan Navani, Chairman of the National Committee, India at 75, Vinay Heber from the Harvard Business Publishing Group, and Mr. M.B. Subaya, Chairman of the National Skill Development Corporation. Mr. Godrej, what one gets staggered by is the scale of the problem and what needs to be done. While we have successes in pockets, how do we get it to scale up right now?
This is really one of India's big issues. Everything has large scale, and we've got to learn to scale up on everything we do. We can start with small experiments and then learn to scale it up very rapidly. And you're right, we're planning at the same time to see that the salience of manufacturing in the GDP goes up very considerably. That would mean manufacturing needs to grow by 10 to 12% to achieve that target. And at the same time, the shortage of skills and training in people who go into manufacturing will also have to be tackled. So it is a problem. That's why people like Ram and Subbu are taking this up, to ensure that we are able to do it on a large scale, to do it very systematically. And this can't be left to only one sector of the economy. To my mind, this must be done by companies, it must be done by educational institutions, it must be done by new kinds of institutions we should form, which can provide the kind of skilling and training we are looking for, and we need to benchmark. I think some countries have historically done these things well. Germany has done it well, Switzerland has done it well, in recent times Singapore has done it well. We need to benchmark, get back best practices into the country, and then scale it up to the needs our country has, which no other country has experienced.
To the scale issue which you asked, there are a couple of ways we need to look at. One is, you are not going to build one institution which can handle 1 million people or something like that.
Sure.
It's a great way to replicate what has been learned in one location. Even if you can produce in one location, let's say 10,000, 15,000 or whatever it is, you can replicate it so long as the processes are codified and there's a lot of digitization behind it in terms of automation.
Sure.
The second level of way we look at scale is, if the country is going to be wiring up broadband, rural broadband across the panchayats, 250,000 of them, then disseminating from one location to multiple locations and a two-way communication becomes possible because of the bandwidth itself. We are beginning to conceptualize some of these things. We can run some pilots, whether it's in Rajasthan, in Ajmer, or in Visakhapatnam, or in North Tripura, where the early stages of rural broadband are going to be deployed at the panchayat level. So it's a combination of process, combination of digitization, combination of access through the broadband network, which will enable us to scale up, whether for the teachers or for the people who want to be trained. Ultimately, a labor management information system, which is essentially an exchange,
Sure.
which completely matches the supply with the demand, so that automatically it can happen through the system. That's what countries like Germany have achieved. Since our scale is huge and automation is going to be one critical component of anything which we do.
Digitization, does it throw up a huge opportunity when you're talking about scale like this? And is that the way to go? I mean, can we expedite the solutions?
I mean, we're talking about needing to scale up to unprecedented levels and scale fast. So digitization is a huge ally, and fortunately for us, the entire ecosystem of digitization, Mr. Godrej spoke about the physical networks, but also on the content side, there's more content available than ever before. Harvard and MIT have come together and set up this platform where interactive courses are being offered, and any of us, anyone, anywhere in the world can go and sign up for any course. It's available free of cost. It's an open platform. You don't need much more than internet access. There is certification at the end of it. So technology, it really can be used to address problems from end to end. whether it's mobilization of people for skill development programs, curriculum development and planning, the delivery of the program, assessments and quality management, as well as the final step, which is linkage back to industry. I mean, one problem we have in India is there are people who may be employable in certain parts of India. Let's say there may be carpenters or electrician available in Bihar, but it's required in Karnataka. How do you make that match happen? And again, that's where technology exchanges.
So technology can be a thread that connects all of this. But Mr. Subbiah, let me ask you a very basic question. In India, every time we do something, there are also skeptics, and we have to cover that end of it. And the skeptics' view of what we are doing in the skill development arena is the fact that you're dealing with multiple bureaucracies, you're dealing with multiple ministries. Every ministry has its own skill development module. You're talking about public-private partnership, but hey, private companies anyway do skill development because they're forced to do it. How can you get all these different lines to talk the same language?
Yes, there are. I mean, states, various departments in the government, everybody. I think the more people do it, it's just again like anything else, the survival of the fittest will happen after a little while. Right now, the more people do it, the better. But there is a lot of issues where the only problem happens is when you have some training done by certain ministries which are free, and therefore people just to while away their time, they might go there. But when our partners, entrepreneurs get into training, they have problems of recruiting people because they have to pay to come and get skilled, and that's really when the problems and issues come up. And I think that's a huge problem right now which we are facing, with our partners are facing, in ability to mobilize. The NREG, which you mentioned earlier, is another main competition. When they get money for sitting and doing nothing, or shifting mud from one place to another, then why should I go for skilling is another kind of a issue. We have had a lot of resistance from different areas, but we've now overcome all that.
Mr. Ramadrai, let's look at it at different levels. When you talk about skill development, obviously the challenges are many, the scale is huge, but it also involves multiple ministries. It also involves the center, the state, the private sector, the bureaucrat on the ground, the villager, and every person in the chain. How do you bring this together, and what are the early successes that one can talk about here?
No, I think everything starts with somebody owning up something. When you leave everybody to do whatever they feel like, ultimately accountability, responsibility totally disappears. A simple example, you take the Delhi Metro. Both in terms of time, cost, quality, it beat all the records in the world. Now, here is a project that has been run by the government completely with the leadership that was put in place, where the leader, after retirement, he took up that position because nobody else wanted it. But if the supporting mechanism where the enablers, whether it's the state government or whatever it is, or an event that is driving it, namely in the second situation it was the Commonwealth Games, the first situation it was to get it going so that the people could benefit. Today when the number of people are using, and it is one of the most profitable initiatives in the country itself, it's not even losing money, it's making profits. So it's a very classic example of why does it happen whereas something else doesn't happen. In all of these, what we are trying to say is, let's own up something like even in the construction sector. If I'm building a campus for TCS, I'm going to mandate that X number of percentage of people will be skilled, otherwise they cannot bid for this program. Once you start with that kind of a fundamental, automatically everything begins to align, because the fellows who are going to bid on that project have a commitment to make it. They in turn will pass it on to the subcontract to say that unless you skill the people, I cannot engage you. So I think we've got to go through the whole chain and demonstrate on a scale. Let's say 25,000 people are skilled, immediately other people are going to watch, my God, this project went on time, we got an extra money, we were able to distribute to the people as bonuses, whatever it is, and ultimately people are going to adopt that.
When you talk about skill development, you talk about an umbrella concept, Rajan, but there are a lot of different facets to it. Should we use this concept across the board and mandate that even for management students or management cadre, for instance, where this is a constant learning exercise?
No, absolutely. I think in today's age, for any company to really be globally competitive and kind of increase, enhancing skill sets of your existing management cadre in several always is a given. I mean, right as what Mr. Subbu was saying in terms of enhancing skill sets for plumbers and carpenters or self-employed people, the same thing, because as you move up on your skill sets, definitely your livelihood opportunities, etc., improve and increase. And I think if you extend that from self-employed to companies to nations or to countries, I think for countries to be able to maintain the economic growth rates that they have, talent mobility is something that is going to be a given going ahead.
New areas of professions are emerging, and we don't have the skill sets to meet that.
No, absolutely, and I think therefore the opportunity in India to be able to leverage that, again, because we have the demographic dividend, how do we leverage that opportunity sooner than other countries can? Because a lot of the areas that you mentioned are very strongly manpower driven. They're manpower driven skill sets, which will be required globally.
One could also argue a lot of the problem is because of our educational system, Mr. Damodaran, which needs a complete rehaul. So, yes. I mean, when you talk about advising the Prime Minister on this, are you also advising a rehaul on that? Because, we are producing engineers who are not employable, we are producing graduates who just have a degree and nothing more. I mean, do we need a full rethink of this?
No, I think we need to have a rethink at how the education is going to be done, whether it's the school level, namely the primary or the secondary school. Unfortunately, we have concentrated a lot more on the higher education in this country, and we must look at the school education in its entirety. Second thing is, we must look at all the labor laws, which may be stifling for the employers from a point of view of Apprenticeship Act as an example, or some of the other enablers which are not enabling it today. They were formed, let's say, at the time of independence. Are they relevant today is the question we need to ask ourselves. I think every part of this thing, unless it's looked at, we're going to have laws which may stifle what we want to do, or the relevance of that particular education may not lead to what we want as outcomes at the end of the day. And the employers need to wake up to say that if I need a skill, there is a role for me also to play in terms of content, in terms of competency levels, in terms of specifying what I need, and in terms of wages that needs to go into it.
Sure. Vinay, one country that really shines through the entire crisis period has been Germany. It's got the lowest unemployment rate, it's got the most robust economy, and a large part, you were pointing out earlier, was because of the way they've structured the education system, the focus on skill development. What are the lessons we can learn from there?
So, Germany has a very interesting system that has caught the eye of many experts who are looking at this problem in various markets. What they have there is an apprentice system, or what they call a dual system, whereby students at the high school level elect to do an apprentice program. Instead of going to university, they could elect to do an apprentice program and work with a company, as well as in parallel have formal education. So they may spend 4 days a week with a company, and they have given a choice of 350 different vocations, right? It could be winemaking or welding or hairdressing or even finance and banking. So they can choose a vocation, and the entire education then, they spend anything from 2 to 3.5 years working with a company. And we are not talking of a few big companies that are involved here. It's 500,000 companies in Germany that hire people. These are paid employees, so which addresses the problem about payment of fair wages and mobilization. So, and from the company's point of view, they are getting talent that they can mold in the specific skill sets they require. What's interesting about this is that the scale at which is operating. We are talking of 2 out of every 3 students coming out of the high school system going into this dual process. So it's not a few people who are not getting into university or who need it that are going. There's no blue collar, white collar system. So it's for everyone. It's open. Companies pay for it. It's a different form of private-public partnership. So companies, the government sets the standards on quality, certification, assessments. Students, at the end of it, 57% of people who train with a company end up getting employed by that company.
Sure.
So it's also a channel for creating employment, and from the student's perspective, either they can choose to get employed or they can choose to drop out after a year and go to university. There are credit systems that are linked beautifully. So I think there are a lot of lessons around this private-public partnership, the creating the both the work and the learn and integrating it together to make sure that what people are learning in the classroom translate into skills that are used in the workplace.
Mr. Godrej, the other problem is the constant missive that there is no connection between academia and the professional workplace, and that leads to a problem where you have to hire, especially in the sector like an IT sector, you have to hire engineers only to retrain them. Is that something that should be expanded into when you talk about skill development? Because you can't look at that as a separate problem.
It adds on to cost, and more importantly adds on to the time element. But I think in the absence of anything, you got to get started somewhere, and it will flow back into the educational system. At the same time, one works with the educational system. Like I said, we are starting with the vocational education at the school level. Then the point which you raised with regard to making the engineering colleges into vocational education institutions as an additional program. We are beginning to experiment for welding as an example in some of the universities themselves through simulation techniques. So I think you got to do a combination of multiple things before everything comes together at the end of the day. You can't be just saying where is the responsibility of the academic institutions when they have never done this in the past, and suddenly say that they are going to be waiting for the next 10 years before they come and say, hey industry, this is the ready output that you wanted. So I think it's a combination of these things. Similarly, the IT industry did it. In the absence of anything coming out of the system, we took up the challenge of skilling the people because the market was out there and we created the market. Once that was done, we knew exactly what we needed and we started pushing back to the academic institutions. When I joined TCS, I had to go through a 12-month program. Today, a kid has to go through only a 3-month program. Isn't that a comparison at the end of the day? That's what we are talking. There has to be a certain amount of finishing school at the industry also.
Right. Mr. Subbiah, how do you connect the dots over there if you want to train the trainers with the knowledge of industry and on-ground realities? How do you link it up together, and are there challenges that throws up?
No, that's exactly the role of the sector skills councils that we are forming all over. Earlier, if you go back in history and see what was happening, the guilds were taking care of that. They set the standards, they set the accreditation systems and things like that. Because everything was taken over by government and education was taken over by the government, and then they set up the accreditation systems, there was no connect between the industry or the user and the young people. So now the sector skills councils are being formed, and this will eventually start setting, as I said, the accreditation systems and keep updating it, because there will be a constant input from the industry, because it's run, the sector skills councils is run by the sector, by the industry themselves. I think this is the whole idea.
What we also don't realize is, Rajan and Mr. Damodaran, that we are seeing the teething troubles of an economy which is outpacing any other, and you also have had a very short window. I mean, we are a 20-year-old story in many respects, and a lot of these problems are a problem of actually rapidly growing on one end, and policy not really keeping pace, and that's why the education system is not being able to keep pace with this.
I think that's why the role of the private sector comes in a big way.
Sure.
The public-private partnerships are being tried in a number of areas. But at the end of the day, I think all of us as citizens have to own up the responsibility instead of blaming somebody.
At the most basic level, it starts there.
I think you've got to ask yourself some of the basic questions at the very basic level and start implementing it rather than talking big bhashan. The change is in implementation, the change is in focusing on the right thing, one at a time, but all of them converge if all of us look at the problem the same way.
So the problem can seem very large, but in pockets where you have success, you can replicate that.
Correct. And I'll give you an example. The problem with MBAs is not something that is specific to India alone. Two of our faculty, Professor David Garvin and Shrikant Datar, did a lot of research and culminated it in a book called Rethinking the MBA. Now this was looking at the MBA at a global level. Then what Shrikant did was he came to India and really worked with schools here. So what the group did was really said, what does the curriculum need to be? And then shared curriculums. Now these curriculums are then put on a website. So I think the solution here is not for one person or one institution to come up with an idea. It requires, yes, public, private, but even within universities, within corporates, a lot of working together to establish
But I think
standards.
the crux of it is also a mindset issue, isn't
Yeah.
there? I mean, at the end of the day, you have to make that commitment. And Mr. Subbiah, is that a big challenge? The mindset, the respect, the dignity for labor.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a huge mindset problem there, but I think again, with the time would sort that out, and my belief, because once we started the program and the publicity program, first of all, there is a mindset problem in terms of just the blue-collar work itself. There's a mindset problem in terms of taking a job 30 kilometers away from your home. These are all mindsets we are the first ones to tackle. I don't think we can run before we can learn to walk. I think we are in the process of learning to walk right now, and I don't think we should worry about running at this stage.
Right.
So I think it's a parallel movement, which we need to kind of, positively use, because, and for that, it is very important that those professionals get paid, levels which are globally acceptable. They're allowed to enhance their skill sets and move up in their certification level, so you can have a better plumber, a better carpenter, and there are some very interesting initiatives that allow them to reach out to people. We keep blaming our strong society for the reason why we, sometimes are not moving fast enough, but I think we positively leverage that strong society, because that is really the advantage that we have as a country. I think skilling is one thing that aligns political interests, because, skilling livelihood, it aligns, the people at the society level, whether it is industry, whether it is NGO. I mean, it impacts pretty much every single individual in a positive manner. So I think this is one theme that can really actually bring the positivity back in society and leverage our strength as a strong society, which many other countries like
and it's
China,
a strength that we've always had, right?
Yeah,
We've been the biggest exporters of IT professionals, bankers, and all of that. So maybe we will have, one day the biggest export of skilled workforce as well. Gentlemen, we'll have to leave it over here. Thank you so much for joining us.